Okay. Today, my guest is Professor René Belderbos. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about René as a person, Professor Belderbos as a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. René Belderbos is a professor at KU Leuven, Belgium, at Maastricht University and at UNU-MERIT, which is in the Netherlands. His research focuses on innovation strategies, international business strategies of multinational firms, location strategies, global knowledge sourcing, intellectual property rights, and innovation. He has published widely in our top journals, served as an associate editor of Global Strategy Journal, editorial board member of the Strategic Management Journal, and JIBS. He has been consultant to the European Commission, the OECD, the Flemish, Belgian, Dutch governments, and the National Institute of Science and Technology Policy in Japan. In 2019, he received the JIBS Silver Medal for his contributions to JIBS. Thank you, René, for joining us.
Thank you.
René, how did you start? Or what did you want to become when you were a child?
Yeah, not an economist, I'm afraid. I think I had two dreams. One was to become an archaeologist, so digging in the mud to find more evidence on what happened in history. And the second one was to become an astronomer, looking into history even longer ago, and the birth of the universe. But finally, I realized, on the one hand, that the archaeologist profession was not so attractive to me because I did not have the patience, probably, to dig through with a teaspoon to dig through cubic meters of soil. And for an archaeologist, my physics proved to be not the strongest subject in high school. Proved to be too weak, so nothing came of these ideas finally.
René, where did you grow up?
In the Netherlands, I spent my youth.
And about the progress towards academia, especially in international business, how did you choose academia? And within academia, how did you choose IB?
Yeah, so indeed, these are two different questions, you could say. And for me, there were two different topics. I first chose to become a researcher, to enter academia. And only later, I chose to be an IB scholar. So I start with the first part, choosing scholarship, choosing academia. I think the really conviction that I should become a scholar only came later in my PhD trajectory. I started my PhD research actually in Japan because I received a scholarship from the Japanese Ministry of Education to do research in Japan. I wrote a research proposal for this, and I was very interested in finding out about the Japanese economy and Japanese multinational firms. But at that time, I was a bit reluctant to accept an offer of a PhD position, maybe to preserve my freedom at that time. And only once I started to do my research and came to enjoy that and noticed that I enjoyed that a lot, I accepted the PhD position. So at the start, I did not have really the ambition to become a scholar. But by doing research, I learned that this was the vocation for me. Maybe it's also interesting to note that my research in Japan was actually also much of a coincidence because I got to Japan first in '87 when I wanted to do a traineeship abroad, and I applied with the student exchange organization ISEC, and I wanted to go to the US to do some traineeship there. But the program, and that's a kind of computer program, matched me to a position at the employers organization in Japan. So just by sheer coincidence that I ended up in Japan, and finally then I got interested in Japan so much that I applied for the scholarship and continued to do research in Japan, and that brought me into the academic career. So
how long did you stay in Japan? How long
at that time, but the first time 3 months in '87 to do my traineeship. And then on the scholarship, about 1.5 years. But then I didn't finish my PhD research. I was gathering a lot of data on Japanese multinational firms for my dissertation. So I went back in '92 and '93, and all in all, I've spent quite a few years in Japan over the past decades.
Interesting.
So I still owe you the IB part. I think that's another story. That has to do a bit with with my career, basically, or my career possibilities. So actually, I'm trained as an economist, and I've done work on strategic trade policy, on strategy research, and from an economics perspective. And I was working at the time, it was in the late 1990s, at SPRU, the Science Policy Research Unit of the University of Sussex in Brighton. It was a great place and intellectually challenging, but didn't provide a lot of job security. So we had 2 young children, and we desired some economic stability and also schooling possibilities for our children that were not too expensive. So when Maastricht University opened up a vacancy in international business, because its master and bachelor programs were growing a lot, has become a very popular university, I applied and I got the job. But of course, that meant that I had to sort of reinvent myself from an industrial economist that had to become an IB scholar. Was not too difficult because I was schooled as an economist, but in industrial organization. And there we look at competition between firms, what happens in industries. Maybe from a policy perspective, we look at these issues, but it's still the same firm behavior that we study also in international business. So the step from industrial economy to IB was not that large for me. But I still had to adapt, and I must admit that the decision to become an IB scholar was also, in a sense, an economic decision based on career prospects.
Perfect, thank you. About things that you don't put on your CV that people might find interesting about you.
Yeah, maybe my situation at home. I'm married to a Mexican, but a Mexican with Japanese ancestors, and I met her in Japan. So our children have Dutch, Aztec, Spanish, and Japanese blood. So my family life is sort of a multicultural experience. Perhaps not so different from what internationalizing firms experience when they first go abroad. So I have a kind of mini IB situation at home. Yeah.
Regrets? Have you got any regrets?
Well, academic regrets or more in general? Is it still a general story or is it an academic story that we're talking about?
Personally, I'm interested in the personal regrets section, but if you feel more comfortable with academic regrets, by all means.
No, personally, I had told myself to travel more, to see more countries, to experience more different cultures. And during my stays in Japan, I did see Asia quite a bit, but not so much Latin America. So I thought I had planned to travel half a year or a year through Latin America after finishing my dissertation. But well, after finishing my dissertation, I happened to be married and we were expecting our first son. So nothing really came of this. And I think I have to give it another try after retirement. So that's on the personal, more on the personal, in the personal view. In terms of academia, I have not some a slight regret that I have not pursued more proactively a career partially in the US, because the US is a top location for scholars and academic research with many resources. Lots of things are happening there. And I had also some idea that I would spend a couple of years in the US doing research there. But well, I found myself drawn to Japan, and yeah, it's difficult to focus on two very different countries in my career. And I also came a bit to the conclusion that maybe the more individualistic attitude and approach in the US is not really so much a good fit for me. I think Europe has more of a balance between what I can call care and competition. It's not only about individual achievements and competing, but also try to provide a healthy balance between life, family life and work, teamwork and individual achievement. I think I'm more sort of familiar, I'm more comfortable with the European approach than with the US approach. So although I would have liked to spend some years in the US in a position there, finally I understand why I did not do so, and I don't really regret it that didn't happen.
But you have a point. It is different. Even the tenure process is different in European universities. Some of the British universities, or like INSEAD or French university, they do have this American system in place. But you're right. European tenure system is different. When you were mentioning that you were hired as a PhD, you actually start building a career as a PhD student in Europe. And that's very normal. Then you mentioned same thing in Japan, because they actually have a tenure track for each of the students. Okay, about research portion. How do you explain your research and the importance of your research to people who don't read regularly JIBS or SNJ? What do you do, and why is it important?
So when I explain it to, say, laymen or common people, let's say, I would say something that I'm studying what multinational companies are doing, what these large firms that have activities in several countries, what they do, how they behave. For instance, where they invest, where they create employment, but also where they dismiss people and where they withdraw their investments. If they work together with universities and support local university research. If they make local economies more vulnerable, or if they strengthen local economies, and if they engage in corrupt practices, or actually are forces to combat corruption in several countries. And this type of research is then important because local and national governments have to understand what multinational firms are doing in order to come up with the right policies to sustain their social and economic goals. Because many countries are confronted with the powerful nature of multinational firms.
René, perfect. About MNCs, when you talked about MNCs, I'm curious about things that are understudied in international business. What are the things that are neglected, omitted, especially for MNC research or IB research? What's your take on it?
So maybe one of them is the politics recently. The politics of international business and political business strategies. I think they have become more important. We see, for instance, the example of Huawei, a key challenger to Apple and Samsung in the smartphone markets, and challenger to Ericsson in the infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure business, but also seen as a possible instrument of the Chinese state and seen as a security risk, and therefore denied access to markets and technologies. At the same time, of course, you see that Western firms have difficulty in China, and they face also political interventions there. So it's becoming more and more difficult to understand the nature of the actions of multinational firms in a polarized world without their relationship with the countries in which they are active and the political interests of the countries in which they're active. And I think we have not given that a lot of attention in recent research. So we have to bring back the political economy into IB research.
But your point is a bit more specific about politicized firms and not really nationalistic economies or populist economies, but you're talking about firms acting as political agents. Is that it?
Well, firms have to take into account political interest and have to find a balance between the interests of different countries if they want to continue doing business in different countries. And so that explains, for instance, their investment behavior, but also their performance in markets. And some firms have difficult decisions to make, like if they want to adapt their software in China in terms of, for instance, making search routines not work or allow the search routines to bring in censorship of in China. So these are difficult decisions that firms have to take. And firms also become like get into the middle of political conflicts between countries. So in that sense, how firms deal with those pressures and these conflicts is an important research topic, I think, for the future. But I think there's something also quite obvious that is in need of more attention, and that is, of course, the climate change and sustainability issues. So, yeah, international business is and global value chains, that is about transport, airports, trade, but also then kerosene, trucks, and CO2 emissions. So IB is, you could say, all about putting pressure on climate and the environment. So in a way, the entire system of trade and investment may need to be rethought, no? And we need local rather than global value chains to put less pressure on the environment. So I think that's also a topic that we have not really thought through a lot. So that provides for lots of research opportunities in the future.
So you're identifying climate change, sustainability, research in IB.
Yeah, I think that is really a fruitful area for research, and that might require more multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research. And if we want to look at multinational firm strategies and maybe their consequences of global value chains for the environment, we may need to team up with climate researchers, and we need to have metrics to see the impact of multinational firms on local economies. So yeah, that requires more interdisciplinarity.
You're in a unique position, actually, René. You've seen the European mentality, the Asian or the Japanese mentality, let's say, over a couple of decades. There's this progression towards a new type of IB research, IB thinking. About this evolution or culture of IB research evolving into something new, what can you say about the progress from where we were and where we're headed to? What are we losing along the way? What are we gaining along the way in this evolution?
Yeah, I see previous scholars in your series also alluded to this. There is, of course, more inclusivity in terms of scholars from many different countries contributing to IB research. and publishing in the IB journals. And that's a good development. We get more heterogeneity, more different perspectives. Yeah, we can compare behavior of multinational firms in different countries better by having the local perspective from different countries. I also see a clear evolution towards use of better methods with attention to identification strategies, causality issues, omitted variable biases, and so on. I think this also has then helped to avoid quick conclusions that are not really substantiated. It also has increased attention to the limitations of our research, and that has been taken more seriously over the years in our papers. So that is really also something that I appreciate a lot, the culture of more rigor, and several editorials and papers or methods have contributed to this, I think, in this regard. Where I find not so much development is in the diversity of the type of research in IB journals. I think we are still a bit too much in a straitjacket of papers that need to develop always new theory. So we have maybe 500 papers on entry mode choice, so we have 500 theories of entry mode choice. And maybe we need to first make sure which of these theories actually can be replicated, which tests can be replicated, and which theory holds most. And then we can build cumulative knowledge. We really have established what theories are most powerful. So we need more replication studies. They're a bit incremental, but I think we need these incremental studies to complement new theory building papers. So we may need more variety in contributions in the IB journals. Not only theory building, also explorative studies, replication studies, phenomenon-based studies. I've been on the board of the Strategic Management Journal, and that journal has already made that change, allowing more different types of contributions to the journal. And JIPS has been maybe surprisingly conservative on this front, and I think it's time to change to allow more variety in the types of contributions.
Okay, thank you. About the advice portion, the mentoring portion. What do you wish you would have known when you were starting out? Things that would have saved you so much time, pain, agony.
Yeah, looking back, I think I would have liked to have known how important it is for good research to have a department, research department, to be working in a research department with lots of PhD students, postdocs, and faculty interaction to exchange ideas and to collaborate. I found that it's very important to collaborate and to work in a team. But in the early years of my academic career, I spent in Rotterdam and in Brighton. I worked mostly by myself, and I could not do so much and did not learn so much as I could have done, I guess. So when I moved to Maastricht, I started to collaborate with more scholars and with PhD students. But only when I then moved in 2000 to Leuven, I could really integrate the research group, and I could do much more work and learn much more in that setting. So I would say that a good PhD program is sort of the lifeblood of a department that has ambitious research agenda, has an ambitious research agenda. So that is, I think, the key issue that maybe I would regret with hindsight, that I worked a lot by myself in the early years, while collaboration is much more interesting and provides for much more learning.
You know, there's this saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think it's very true for a PhD student. the environment that the PhD student is in is quite instrumental in development. Which skills were most difficult to develop during this process for you?
I think in my case, it was hypothesis building. It was writing. So when I moved from the economics domain, economics discipline, more to the IB field, I had to change the way I write papers, the way I do research. I had to more explicitly build theory and derive hypothesis. And that is a prerequisite to be able to publish in IB journals. But in economics, it's very different, the writing style and the importance of theory building. So I think it took me about 2 years really to master writing papers for IB and to have the transition from the economics discipline to the IB field. So I found that myself, I found quite challenging. But well, in general, what you need is a good academic writing and a good research methodology. And that skill building should be part of any PhD program.
But when you look at junior faculty and when you look at PhD students in Europe, in America, elsewhere, what are some of the common mistakes that you see across our young colleagues? Things that
not only young colleagues make mistakes. I make mistakes, but also and all the senior scholars make mistakes. So I think what I find as a reviewer, we have to point out mistakes that young scholars or senior scholars, we don't know as in the blind review system, what mistakes are made. And what I find in terms of grounds for rejection of a paper that occurs quite frequently is the discrepancy between theoretical constructs that are developed and their measures. So I think it's important to have a very sort of well-grounded motivation for why the constructs are measured in the way they're measured, and to convince the reader and the reviewers that they do not pick up other influences than the hypothesized influence. That is something that I find is problematic with papers quite often. I do have 1 or 2 other recommendations. Yes. If you want me to continue.
Yes, please.
One thing is that I find a bit troublesome in some of the literature is that maybe because we have a need to always come up with new theories, we see actually a new terminology, but for similar concept that are already known in the theory. And that limits academic progress, it limits cumulative knowledge building. And here maybe an example is the work on offshoring, which is foreign direct investment, but then mostly investments that are servicing the home market. So new literature on offshoring has grown, but that literature often doesn't make, it's not very aware and doesn't make good citations to the FDI literature because the terminology is different. But yeah, offshoring, if it's based on investments by multinationals, is just the same as FDI. It's a specific type of FDI, but lots of the earlier literature and the insights got lost because of the new terminology. So it's good to bring in new insights, and I think the offshoring literature has brought in the insight that there are various ways of offshoring, not only through FDI but also through contracts and offshore outsourcing. But if we have to use different terminologies all the time, we lose the contact with earlier research, and we do not allow cumulative knowledge building. So that's something that I experienced in my work and in reading through papers. A third issue that I had is interviews. So interviews with practitioners. I think this is very valuable. So I can recommend doing this to be informed about how managers think about the issues at hand. But I would warn against taking the views of the managers expressed as at face value. Especially if the topics are a bit sensitive, there might even be some cognitive dissonance on the part of managers. And you can't really avoid doing your own research to really find out what's going on. I can give you two examples. One is the role of tax treatment in foreign investment location decisions. Here, managers always say that the tax treatment is secondary. Of course, they like lower taxes, but it's not the primary interest. The primary interest is the local infrastructure and market potential. But if I run regressions on location studies, on location decisions, and I take into account all the other factors that are important in location decisions, I still find that the tax is a primary and very important determinant. So it's mostly because of political, or presentation issues that managers don't really want to admit that actually tax treatment is a very important driver of location decisions. And earlier on in my career, I experienced something similar with research on trade barriers. So I looked at the role of anti-dumping duties on investments by Japanese firms in Europe. Japanese firms were targeted with anti-dumping duties, and those were levied by the European Union to protect their industries. And then I interviewed a couple of Japanese companies, and they said, no, we know there are anti-dumping duties, but we go to Europe because we want to contribute to the local economy, because it's an important market, not so much because of the anti-dumping duties. But when I checked the FDI decisions of these firms, I found that anti-dumping duties had a very big significant impact on their investment strategies. And moreover, once the duties were abolished, I found out that all these investments became divestments, and firms withdrew from their manufacturing investments in Europe. So it was clear that anti-dumping was very important in their decisions. Then I heard from a colleague of mine who was a classmate of one of these managers in these companies. Went to the pub with him, that after maybe a pint of 5 or so, only at that moment, the manager admitted that actually it was anti-dumping that was really leading to their investment and divestment behavior. So if topics get sensitive, it's very difficult to interview managers and get the correct answer. So there's nothing better than doing your own research to find out how firms behave.
Interesting, thank you. René, for the sake of time, what is a question that I should have asked you about Tevens?
Yeah, so I was thinking you're interviewing mostly senior scholars, and senior scholars are in a very different position. They have tenure compared to junior scholars. So maybe a question would have been interesting in terms of how senior scholars keep on being motivated and how their tasks and roles change over time. And then maybe I can reflect a bit on the answer to such a question. Yeah. So I've been chair of the hiring and the promotion committee for quite a few years in Leuven. And well, then I had to look at sort of the incentive systems for scholars, and for non-tenured professors, this is clear. There's the tenure evaluation. For young assistant professors, or associate professors, there is the promotion possibilities and evaluation. But for tenured full professors, there's not much of extrinsic incentives that we can give to them. No, there's in European schools, there's very little also possible in terms of salary increases or peer evaluations. So for a school and for a department, it's very important to keep the senior scholars motivated and productive. So how do we do this? And I came to the conclusion that there's not much you can do in terms of extrinsic motivation. So when hiring scholars and when giving them tenure, it's very important to look at intrinsic motivation, the curiosity for research. So not necessarily hiring the career tigers that perform quite well, but are more extrinsically motivated. But for long-term, say, performance of the faculty and the well-being of the department, it's important to focus on intrinsically motivated researchers. Let's say the curious among us, because they will keep on being motivated to do research even without external incentives.
How do the European, we're talking about European versus American senior scholarship, right? Your points about curiosity, how to keep it alive for the Europeans. More specifically, what is most actionable? Something that you would need to inject into the system so that they're intrinsically motivated. What would motivate them most?
So you mean in terms of senior scholars? There's a lot of lots of incentives for junior scholars, no, to make career, and that depends on their performance, but not so much for senior scholars. So what works for me is to be able to work with PhD students and junior scholars. So I will say there are two types of tasks, and maybe the types of tasks shift a bit over the career. There's the exploration, which is research, curiosity driven, and there is the exploitation, which is maybe teaching, using the research insights in teaching activities. Consultancy, maybe exploiting your knowledge in consultancy, and perhaps also administration. And I think senior scholars tend to focus more on the exploitation part than on the exploration part. But for me, I continue to find exploration very important, and I try to combine this with an exploitation role. And I think that really is so because I'm fortunate to work with young and ambitious people such as PhD students and young scholars quite a lot. And that collaboration keeps me curious and keeps me motivated because we can match the new ideas, methods, and ambitions of these young scholars with my broader experience. And I think that's a very good recipe for achieving research that is both rigorous and relevant. So I hope that I can continue such research for the foreseeable future. For me, that works.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, René, for this interesting interview. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.